David Hume, right here, we're talking about his origin of ideas. Right, so David Hume is going to take a look at empiricism and to see how well it fares put to a critical analysis. Right, so Hume starts with this kind of query, right, this kind of puzzle you've got, right? Can we find an idea that was not first in our senses? Or does it seem to be the case that every idea we have in our heads was first an impression, as Hume will call them, right? Or something we've seen, something we've heard, something we've experienced. Right? This is fairly evident if you ever watch any science fiction. If you ever see aliens, right, from another planet, another galaxy, wherever they may be, another dimension, right, they have very human interests, right? You run across people from other planets in Star Trek, right, who all have a captain and a first officer. It's like they all studied the British Navy, right? But how they do that, they never knew about. So why can we not have any real aliens, right, when we try to do our science fiction? And Hume would say, right, I think the explanation here of this is it's not possible, right? You can't imagine, right, an alien species because we haven't experienced an alien species. And we don't have to use science fiction, right, for this example. We can find other places as well. The king of Siam, for instance, would not believe that water froze, right? Would turn to ice, that's nonsense. He'd lived in a tropical environment his entire life, he'd never seen it. So you have to see things, right? Kind of like eating what's the food taste like you've never eaten? Well, it tastes like chicken. I mean, there's not a good answer, but there's no way to really explain something. There's no frame of reference, right? So it seems that Hume might be correct here, right? That a unicorn, right? You can see a narwhal. You can also see occasionally a deer in Europe that's got a single horn, right? There are ways to suggest this idea to us, right? Unicorns or mermaids. Have you ever seen what are they called? Manatees. You add that and you put a woman's hat on top, you got a mermaid, dragons, or you find old dinosaur bones. I mean, it's just hard to find a single thing that isn't a product of a previous experience, which would then give a great deal of credence to Hume's claim, right, that all of our ideas were first in our impressions, or first in our senses, right? Now, some of those arguments, that seems okay, that seems very reasonable. Doesn't seem he's saying anything rather crazy here. But that's the difficulty in philosophy. If you grant the initial premises, you can find yourself agreeing to something else later and going, how did I get here? We've got to watch this in David Hume. We'll get there by the end of this, right? You can go, okay, wow. But remember, this is the beginning point, right? If you can break and find an example of something that was an idea that was not first in the senses, then David Hume was mistaken about this. If we cannot, right, then we may have to agree with him. And now he does talk about one counterexample, right, to this in his book, right, The Missing Shade of Blue. And I published a paper with this at the University of Edinburgh, Journal of Scottish Philosophy, back in September of 2016, right? Now the question here is, if we have running shades of blue down, right, but you're missing, right, the shades in between. So you got a darker blue on top or a lighter blue on the bottom, either way, inverted. But some shade is missing in between. Could you, looking at that color spectrum, imagine that missing shade? David Hume doesn't think you can, right? We'll see what happens with this, right? When we do the experiment, right? When we do the experiment, we're trying to look at it. We had a setup, so we had 2 missing shades out of 216 possible shades. So basically less than 1%, right, was missing. And we found that 4 out of 72 students here at MST could find the missing shade, but all those students that self-described themselves as being above average in artistic experience, so they may have actually seen the missing shade sometime previously. So they couldn't actually get a good test on it. But it's a good example. It's really flipping hard to even imagine, right, the missing shade with the right there in front of you, and you got a sliding scale where you can find over here and make the whole thing's match as we set the test up, right? Even that is very, very difficult, right, to find the missing shade. I tried and got it wrong. I couldn't find the missing shade, right? So it seems that Hume might really be onto something. So it's a good question whether you can even find the missing shade. He grants that you can, right, just for point of argument. However, it's a small point, right, even as was true, right? It's not a question about, humans talk about our ideas and not about, right, shall we say, some missing shades in the color wheel. So he doesn't think a significant example to alter his general theory, right? So then he moves on. And now we get to where it gets a little more like, okay, how do we get to this conclusion? Once again, all our ideas came from our impressions. Now, when we start talking about the future, or beliefs about the future, well, we draw upon the past. Now, in the past, we've experienced the past becoming the future. So we've seen past futures becoming, right, the future. We've never seen a future, right, by definition. So if all of our knowledge comes from experience, And we claim to have knowledge of the future. How is this possible, says Hume? We have no sense experience of it. It doesn't follow, right? We can't make claims about the future, right, as it were. We can't do this. You have what's called the riddle of induction, right? Until you've actually done the next sample, how do you know the next sample is going to be? To assume it's like the rest is to make an assumption that you cannot verify, because you're making an assumption about the future. Now, if you read Stephen Hawkins, for instance, Brief History of Time, his first edition, he'll talk about how you have a big bang, and if the explosion's not strong enough, you'll have a big crunch where it all goes out, right, and comes back in. But once you pass that point of the big expansion becoming a condensing, right, you'd have reversal laws of physics. So there's examples how this could happen, right? And it is a mistake, right? I think the future will always be like the past, right? You can certainly see that in our lives, right? But Hume is saying we have no grounds for making, right, this association. And that's the question, is intellectual justification for it, right? So this is that negative, right, conclusion we were talking about, right? Hume's not got a positive answer. Now, in the reading for next week, he's going to try to flip that around and try to come back with an answer, right, based in custom. But he's going to set out a fundamentally difficulty is what grounds do we have? I mean, think about it this way. If we do an experiment, right, I don't know, June 15th, right, 2020 in Toomey, room 250 at 9:30 a.m. Why would we think that experiment holds true, right, at 9:31? If we haven't done the experiment, we're assuming, right, nature continues on, right, as we observed previously when it's unobserved, right? And what proof do you have through observation that things continue as they were, right, when they're observed, when they're unobserved? We can see it's a foundational difficulty. We're going to need something like a concept of substance, as philosophy uses, right, to explain the enduring thing, the impermanence behind our perception. Something like Plato's theory of forms would also come in very useful here to explain why things continue to endure as they are without being observed, something that cannot be confirmed through observation. So we've got a fundamental difficulty in using an purely empirical account, right, which Hume's actually pointed out as the fallacies and problems of using a pure empiricism, and need to supplement it with something else, right? We'll talk about his solution to the problem, right, in the next reading, and in the last book, right, once again, we'll take a look at another way of coming at solving these problems suggested in the century since Hume, as he tries to, other people try to take on this difficulty, right, and solve for this problem. All right, thank you.